Yeah.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm McKenzie, and I'm a CNBC tech reporter. And we are here today against the backdrop of Professor Raskar's announcement of NANDA, which is MIT's vision for new infrastructure that supports distributed agent intelligence at scale. And what our panel is about today is what happens when that infrastructure meets the commercial world, how decentralized AI agents go from concept to commerce, and what makes them investable, usable, and real. I have a stacked panel, 5 people here. I want to go down the line, have everyone give a very brief introduction, and then we'll get right to it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alpin. I'm very much looking to a world of more AI agents. I just got on a flight and got here just in time to make it. I'm happy to be here. I work with Borderless Capital. We are an asset manager and a Web3 VC fund. We invest across the stack, but primarily I focus on early stage companies. We've invested quite a bit in the AI and blockchain intersection. I'm happy to talk to the rest of the group here. I'm also
next.
Yeah.
We got 25 minutes. We got to keep the momentum going. Really necessary. Glasswing Ventures, founder and managing partner. We're one of the largest specialized AI and frontier tech focused firms. Very much focused on first capital lean, so seed and pre-seed. Call to action. If you're looking for money, we're looking for founders. I'm very excited to be here. AI is moving quite slow and quite fast all at the same time.
I'm Einar Brothen, one of the partners at CoinFund. We are an early stage investor in decentralized technologies. We have about 2 active funds with $500 million that we're deploying right now. And we're investors in early decentralized AI companies such as WorldCoin, Jensen, Pluralis, and Prime Intellect.
I'm Dan Bearbander, the general counsel, also an investment partner at Variant, a pre-seed and seed crypto VC, and I lead our AI investments.
I'm Mark Weber. Am I on? Yeah. Mark Weber, investor at Tectonic Ventures and a fellow here at the Media Lab. Formerly a research scientist. We look for B2B tech companies, have a lot of AI companies in our portfolio, and investing out of an $87 million second fund, and our third fund is coming online this year.
Okay, so Mark, I'm going to stick with you for this. We have a room of trad AI specialists here. So much of what the panel is going to be focused on are real-world examples of where this is working, the intersection of AI and crypto. But before we can do that, I just need you to kind of ground the audience. Can you define what we mean when we talk about decentralized AI? Where do you break down the layers of the stack from decentralized training and inference to ownership, governance, and agent architecture? Let's start there, and then we'll get very real very quick.
Sure. I think the 4 key layers of this space start with compute. So we've been operating in a generally centralized compute architecture for a long time, but one thing that Bitcoin did for all of us is really popularize and generalize distributed systems and distributed computing, which is very exciting in the age of AI. The next layer is the model layer. This is really where emerging techniques in federated learning and model fusion with optimal transport are taking hold as we think about how we can develop models in a distributed way. Then there's the data layer, which companies like Vana are pioneering with this idea of user-owned foundation models where as data can be contributed by users instead of just taken from them, and that users could potentially have stakes in foundation models. I think the data layer is an extremely exciting opportunity in the distributed AI space. And then the last is the application layer. And I think this is really where we can use the analog of human intelligence to understand agents in the context of users, which is to say that all of us in our intelligence, we can only be so smart as an individual agent, but it's in the collective that we find true, powerful intelligence when we work together as teams, as organizations, as entities that are larger than ourselves. And I think that's where things start to get really exciting from an AI standpoint, is when you have a distributed group of people that are working together, a group of agents and people working together.
So, technical team, our countdown clock hasn't started yet, so you might want to update that real quick. Einar, you have said that most people still don't really grasp what's going on in this space, that AI, decentralized AI is fundamentally misunderstood, and that even among AI insiders, this is a standing question.
Yeah.
So what should this room of trad AI folks pay closer attention to?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things that are important and why trad AI people should be paying more attention to decentralized AI. I think on the one hand is scaling. How can, and access to compute and GPUs, how can you actually decentralize training and make sure that people in this room can access the GPUs that they need in order to train models wherever they are in the world, and today without paying huge costs up front. So that's really exciting and kind of like probably the closest in decentralized AI. The other piece I would say is around access and censorship resistance. There's a lot of discussions about who gets to train models, who gets to access AI in general. And so a decentralized AI system is vital to ensure that open source and true access.
And Daniel, I want to go to you out of this because you said that crypto's real value is in solving coordination problems, not just self-custody, not censorship resistance. Can you walk us through a case where crypto actually enables better AI, not just decentralization for its own sake?
Yeah, I think if you're not familiar with what crypto does, fundamentally, it's a way to solve bootstrapping problems. And it brings participants, varied participants, to the same layer, aligned by economic upside. That's what Bitcoin did. Decentralized training is the exact same thing. It's like you have a bootstrapping problem. It's extremely expensive for a normal AI developer to build like a foundational model, as an example. Like you can't just do it on your own. You have to go raise an insane amount of money to make that happen. The way decentralized training works is that you say, basically, I will give you future upside if you give me compute. And we're gonna make this trade right now. You're gonna give me compute at, basically, you're gonna lose money right now with the promise that in the future, it'll be worth a lot more money. That is fundamentally what bootstrapping any startup is. Sweat equity is that. And what crypto and AI does, at least with decentralized training, and it applies that to that exact thing to this specific problem where companies today can't afford to train models.
Now, Alvin, Borderless Capital has been investing at the intersection of crypto and AI infrastructure for years now. What is your thesis for when and why AI needs to actually be decentralized, and what parts of the stack actually benefit from that decentralization? Is it monetization, privacy, data control, contribution, versus where does it really not matter?
Yeah, let's start with, I think, what's the most obvious. In a world of AI agents, they will not be using ACH and SWIFT. They will not be using traditional payment methods. So crypto and honestly, blockchains were invented to solve for payments and commerce. And I think that that's a very clear overlap in terms of ensuring that payments are done in a way that are done at the cheapest prices, 24/7 at any time, and it's done in a verifiable way that can't be corrupted using cryptography. So then you start with that, and then you look at monetization. If we expect to see not just one or a few labs or a few companies engaging in the economy of AI agents and an AI-enabled economy, that means you need to be able to coordinate across contributions coming from many different actors, whether they're individuals, they're AI labs, teams of people, and coordinating those incentives, as was just mentioned, and or coordinating how those people are compensated reliably is going to be extremely important to do in a verifiable way. So what blockchains have brought about beyond payments is verifiable compute, verifiable actions, verifiable contracts. And that's something that we believe is actually playing a huge role. We have a few companies, including a company called Bagel, that were started by someone who basically ran most of the infrastructure for Amazon Alexa, and came to this conclusion that we need a layer for monetizing what we consider the backbone of a lot of innovation, which is open source innovation, a lot of it coming out of licensing systems that came out of MIT. Really excited about what Professor Ramesh Raskar is putting forward, creating a new standard for open source contribution. But we believe that these are some of the fundamentals of how blockchains are going to add value to the AI stack.
Now, Regina, you're the founding partner of Glasswing Ventures, where you've led investments across AI-enabled enterprise software, cybersecurity, cloud infrastructure. From your perspective, how do you see the evolution of enterprise AI, and where does decentralization fit into this landscape?
So, as has always been the case with waves of adoption, the collective us are thinking 5 to 10 years out for what the status quo will be then. enterprises are much, much slower moving. And I think that's an important reality to be grounded in. You know, we're all sort of have been caught around LLMs and foundation models, while actually the biggest spend in AI at the enterprise level right now is around predictive models that have been around for 70 years. So that's a bit of a grounding for all of us that generally live in the future. However, I think decentralized AI, there isn't a consistent definition, but using sort of generally what we've been using here, I think there are key opportunities, and various speakers have touched on what I'll call the infrastructure, the compute piece. Will the prevailing approach be blockchain or some form of it? Will it be that, you know, at every edge, whether it's an enterprise edge or honestly consumer edge, we have a lot of power in our households. Could we go and monetize the files or the Comcast compute that we have in our households, and is there a federated model around that? So those are some questions to be addressed. Where I take interest in decentralized AI is around the use of data, which I don't think we've quite touched yet. The notion that to date we have had monolithic models ingesting huge quantities of data and kind of, you know, the mammoth is moving. What about this notion, which really sort of we saw with blockchain, we try to see with federated data, where I, for my own agent, I being the individual or I being the enterprise, can actually leverage my own data and contribute to its training in exchange for a big benefit. Kind of like the analogy that was made around the compute, and instantaneous reward. So you don't have to even go negative on your ROI, so to speak, initially. So we have a company called Inrupt, which is Tim Berners-Lee, for those of you who know who he is, the inventor of the web, and John Bruce, they're keynoting, I think in a bit, that they're talking about giving you the hyper-personalized agent, you're sort of at the consumer level, that follows you everywhere, where your contribution of data contributes to the model in a decentralized fashion, but also the individual.
And Mark, from your perspective, you've worked at the systems level here across privacy, compute, and design. What specific problems does decentralization solve in AI? Which parts of the stack benefit the most? Is it, I mean, I'm putting the same question to you because, like, from more of an academic perspective, I want to hear, like, from your vantage point, what you think. Is it privacy, monetization, control of model outputs?
I think data. Last December at NeurIPS, which is kind of the top technical deep learning conference of the year, Ilya Sutskever got up and said, we're approaching an era of data scarcity. It's like we think that there's so much data in the world, but so much of it is locked up in various ways, either in proprietary systems or in user-governed systems. The amount of data that we have access to, I think we're on the verge at an inflection point that's similar to where oil was in the 1850s. You know, where we started using oil to light gas lamps. And then when the internal combustion came around and the popularization of the car and the automobiles, and oil gradually became everything, like the axis around that the world turned around. And I think we're hitting in a similar inflection point in data, and decentralized systems like Vana, but others as well, like other projects that can speak to the incentive structures around data and incentivize people to contribute data, both at an individual level, at a corporate level, and beyond. That unlock is really the fuel, the rocket fuel that AI needs, and can solve the data scarcity problem in a very meaningful way that's also hopefully an ethical way.
Now, the four of you are deep in the weeds, working with your portfolio companies. You intimately understand what is and what is not working. Speaking frankly, a lot of capital was wasted in the last 2 years on these AI crypto hybrids that did not deliver. So how do you separate signal from noise, especially when you have things like tokenization get introduced into the mix? And I'd love to hear from all of you on this.
Yeah, happy to start there. I think, at least for us, it always starts with a team. And so you got to go deep on the team and make sure that the ideas are valid on themselves. And then secondly, it's about pick up in the market, right? Actual traction. So if you look at something like decentralized compute, you can go to Prime Intellect today and buy compute and pay. They're actually, people are using it, people are making money, you can track it. And so it's delivering instant value. So for me, that's sort of like the proof is in the pudding when it comes to those sorts of things right there.
So from my vantage point, we stayed away from the blockchain AI cross-section in large part because it's our view that the demand is not quite there. So getting the enterprise, demand right is important. Also, if we think about the AI adoption, the higher, sort of from a framework, the higher the impact of AI to the revenue, to the top line, to the critical mission, the less you're going to focus on decentralization, the more you're going to focus on your proprietary data, which by default tends to be narrow but highly valuable. So it undermines in many ways that need for decentralization and a lot of compute. So a lot of our companies are not AI enabled, we're fully AI native. At the core of the product, you have AI architectures rather than wrappers and API calls. So when you come at it from that point of view, it's a lot more critical to know that you have the right models, whether it's RNNs, whether it's transformers, whatever architecture, with the right data set. Don't need a lot of compute. I don't have many companies that have NVIDIA dependencies with the right use case.
Daniel, I'm going to come back to you in 1 second. Alpin, Borderless invests pre-seed, often at the inception layer ideas. After 2+ years of backing teams in the space, what are you starting to see, where are you starting to see credible product market fit emerge? Can you share any examples where decentralization is adding real traction? And then I'm coming to you after this, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks. So, and getting back to the same question that you asked just before that. So anyone investing in very early stages knows that there's lots of noise, there's lots of projects coming out that don't have enough substance. And part of the role of the investors is to decide where to allocate, where not to allocate. I think there are things that are just too early or not necessarily investable, or sometimes they're very experimental. They don't necessarily translate into something that will have value in a longer term. From our perspective, what we've seen, there are a few areas. One of them in particular, just to zero in, is the concept of trust. Right now, there are lots of concerns around trust in large-scale company production around AI. What are the model weights? What is being done with my data? Who's getting compensated for it? How are those models even performing? How do we know that one model is doing better than the other in a neutral way? And a lot of what we're seeing is that there are ways you can work on these problems that utilize some of these technologies. And so one of the companies, for instance, that we've invested in is called Layerlens. They focus on this specific narrow problem, which is how do we ensure and utilize the power of decentralized networks to validate that models are performing and being benchmarked in a dynamic way. The benchmarking and evaluation world is somewhat boring relative to a lot of other aspects of AI, but it's extremely valuable, and it's extremely important that we get it right. Otherwise, you don't even know what the model is actually doing correctly or incorrectly. And that's something that we believe we can add layers of verifiability to using blockchain and using this decentralized network of people that are doing evaluations at scale, dynamically, for all kinds of new models that we see coming out almost every day, right?
May I add just something really quickly? Trust, because I think it's important to underscore. It could be blockchain, could also be explainability and open source. This is the year of open source. I said last year, December was going to be it. No, this is it, because we get a lot of understanding. So we really got to pay attention to the open source piece of this discussion. So,
Yeah,
Dana.
agreed.
I just wanted to go back to your earlier question about what makes sense really fundamentally and what doesn't, which is basically the same thing we're discussing, trying to get at the heart here. To me, we won't invest, at least in something unless in the AI sector, unless the crypto actually makes it better. And it's very easy to lose sight of that because it's a very noisy space. There's three things that I think crypto makes AI better. Just break it down. The first is aggregating resources and talent, whether it be compute and data on the resources side and talent, bringing people to work together, and the same thing. The second is verifiability, which is, why does that matter? Because then you can chain together things and get really interesting, emergent, powerful systems. And the third is self-custody. And the number one example I see right now is with agents with wallets, which was already mentioned here. If you don't fit into those three things, at least I have not yet seen why crypto makes your project better, and that's why it doesn't work for me. It has to actually make the AI better.
I feel like there has been this reputational hit where tokens were supposed to coordinate resources, but in a lot of cases, the token became the product.
Yes.
And so, how does this impact the way you evaluate projects that combine AI and crypto? I think the underlying factor here is just kind of going to, whether it's data or some of the other, the trifecta of use cases you just spoke to. Another thing that comes up pretty often is we hear a lot of theory, but decentralized training ultimately is very expensive. Inference is expensive, and communication between nodes can cost more than AWS. So with that in mind, like, what needs to change for decentralized AI to be competitive technically or economically versus centralized systems? Yeah, Mark, please.
I think there's some very exciting advancements in chips that is happening. You know, GPUs were accidentally good for AI. They were not designed for AI. You know, we made an investment in a company called Neurophos that is metamaterials experts out of Duke University who are pioneering a new form of optical computing that uses metamaterials that can work with light in ways that properties found in nature cannot. This is on the inference side. There's also an exciting, very new advancement we haven't invested in yet, but on the technical side, where we're beginning to develop the technology where we can actually print neural networks onto silicon. And this process is one of the most highly reviewed papers in NeurIPS this past year. Highly recommend checking it out. It's on differentiable logic gate networks. You know, these kinds of innovations at the silicon level, I think, are extremely important in the decentralized stack, because if we have more and more powerful microchips that can be deployed in a decentralized way, they can do more powerful things, especially at the inference level. We start to unlock some of the things that we can do algorithmically as well.
Now, the other thing that comes to mind is that a lot of users don't actually care about decentralization, they care about utility. And so how do you balance building for decentralization versus building for utility and user adoption in enterprise AI?
Well, I think it's important to, decentralization in AI is really for the builders of AI rather than the end users. Ideally, the end users, they don't necessarily need to care. Maybe they will in a privacy or a data manner, but other than that, it's really for the people who are building for the end users, that they are actually able to build permissionlessly and access the tools that they need.
I agree with that. I think for just going back to the payments point, a lot of what we're seeing happening with the adoption of stable coins right now in the economy and in trading is that people are utilizing this form of basically holding dollars on the internet as an effective, efficient way for them to transact. And a lot of the primitives and a lot of the fundamentals of that don't necessarily have to be obvious to an end user, right? But at the end of the day, it'll make things cheaper, faster, and more efficient. I think on the AI side, one of the areas that we're seeing where there's an overlap and it makes sense to people is look at wearables, right? I think we did see like a wave of wearables through like Oura rings and things like that, where people are basically putting on something, an Apple Watch or a ring or something on themselves. It's collecting data about them, and then they're just giving it to a third party. And I think fundamentally we should, and I think people do care about that. Actually, I think it impedes adoption because people at some point start to say, well, I don't really want to give that data up. I think we're in a culture that has kind of accepted it for a good amount of time. But as more and more of our data starts to get utilized for different purposes, that starts to matter more. And there's ways that we can incentivize people for their data more directly. So one of the companies we invested in basically does this with the ring, where you basically purchase the ring, and the data that is basically collected from that ring is you're able to monetize, right? And there's privacy preservation on the data that's collected, right, and anonymized. And I think that that's something that's going to become important.
Go ahead. I was going to say, from an enterprise perspective, I don't think the adopters care up to the point around data. They want to remain the owners of the data. So if decentralization contributes to trust, then it becomes part of the equation. If it doesn't, then it becomes ultimately, here's my data, train your model, but I still own my data. It's less relevant.
That's time, but I think we can take one audience question. Okay, please raise your hand if you'd like to chime in.
It was the beginning of this, Thomas. Nice.
So my name is Thomas. I did have a payment company in blockchain some 10 years back, but I had to shut it down because all the regulatory stuff that is happening in the US. So what do you see the adoption of payment And a lot of talk is there, but people are really not using for day-to-day real use cases. There should be a lot of saying I can walk into the shop and just scan my phone using stablecoin, but that's not a reality yet. So just want to hear from, is it going to happen or just still far-fetched, at least in the US?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at that one. So I think, first of all, we've seen huge regulatory changes with the new president, and so things are definitely changing there. You'll see the stablecoin bill come out at some point. Secondly, when it relates to AI, I think it's a question up in the air whether it needs to be centralized or decentralized payments. Agent payments is definitely top of the agenda for a lot of people, and stablecoins is going to be the money of the internet, and so it makes sense that stablecoin rails is what agents are going to use to pay back and forth. Whether it needs to be fully decentralized or centralized, that piece I think is still up for discussion.
Okay, thank you all for joining us today, and to the MIT Media Lab for hosting this session, and to my panelists.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you. Thanks, guys.
Excellent. Thank you, Colin, for taking us through that session.